It's Sunday, November 12th of 2023, and my life has been radically changed by a Category 4 hurricane in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. I know I need to find a, shall we say, supplemental residence for the summer. I can't. I just can't. So with climate as like my only criterion, I settle on the state of Guanajuato. And that, of course, is going to lead me to San Miguel de Allende, a widely popular Mexican city that has been an expat hub for decades. But remember, the universe had instructed me to explore a city I knew nothing about, Leon. And since I had to fly into Leon to get to San Miguel de Allende, I decided I'd spend 2 days in Leon and then 2 days in San Miguel. When I stepped off that plane, that was the only thing that was certain. The rest I would just have to listen for. As a city, Leon was familiar but unfamiliar. Nothing like Mexico City in terms of size, but just as urban. After wading through Facebook groups and travel videos all day that Saturday, the names of 2 colonias, neighborhoods, kept coming up. Jardines de Moral and Lomas de Gran Jardín. Safe, walkable, established. That was enough to start. That Saturday before leaving Puerto Vallarta, I had reached out to about 5 apartments in Leon. One of them stood out, not because of what the ad said or showed, but because of what it didn't. It was just a picture of a view. A nice view, but just that, in black and white too. I didn't take it seriously. It's Facebook Marketplace. And ads like that are often bait and switch, get you in, oh, that apartment's taken, but I reached out anyway. Who knows? It might connect me with a good agent. I was lucky enough to find a hotel that sat right between the 2 colonias. By the time I flew out on Sunday, only one of the 5 inquiries I made on Saturday got back to me. It was the owner of a 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath in Jardines de Moral. Of course, her only availability was like within an hour of my landing at the airport. So I went straight there, luggage and all. The building was on a nice, quiet neighborhood street, small building, 2 stories, 2 apartments per floor, 4 units total. So when we went into the foyer, I left my luggage and started to follow the owner upstairs. She was like, tu maletas, take my luggage. I'm lugging all my luggage up these stairs. And then when we get to the apartment door, there's like an outdoor iron gate, like in front of the door. So she's unlocking that, and then she's unlocking the apartment door. And so we step inside, and I follow her in. She's, tu maletas. Bring my luggage in from the stairwell into the apartment. Okay. The apartment was charming. It had all of the little touches that I had seen in the ad that made me want to see it in the first place. But all that fortressing was a problem. I mean, it took like 6 keys and 13 minutes for me to get into the building and into my apartment. I was starting to get concerned. I mean, this was one of the safest colonias in Leon. I spent the rest of the evening working, waiting for calls, and listening. So Monday was spent exploring Leon. First things first, they have a Costco, they have a Fresco, which is like Whole Foods in the US, and of course Walmart. Oh, and there was a really good hospital there too. A major shopping mall, Plaza Mayor, was only about like 10 minutes away. And I could tell from the car dealerships that I saw when I was going there that I wasn't in Kansas anymore. Life here would be very different from the seaside village of Puerto Vallarta. Was it going to feel too much like living in the U.S.? The next morning, I left for San Miguel. If you follow me on Facebook, you may remember that I posted about that trip. I only talked about the what, though. I didn't say anything about the why. Peace and blessings, global family and friends, you know who. I have been in Leon, Guanajuato for the past 2 days and am now on a bus headed to San Miguel de Allende for a day trip. Can't be this close and not go. I'm looking forward to it. Very happy to be seeing other parts of Mexico besides my beloved Puerto Vallarta. Hope whatever you're doing, you're having a great day. And talk to you later. The bus terminal at San Miguel was rustic and dusty, very anticlimactic. But when I got to the hotel, I got it. Charming, just beautiful. It was as though all of the charm of colonial Mexico had been poured into a single place. I was in heaven. I spent the day walking around the town, the church, the town square, making new friends. When my debit card started to smoke because of all the art galleries, though, I retreated back to the hotel. San Miguel was charming and picturesque, lovely. But something was missing. I mean, I had walked around all day Monday, and I only had one conversation, and that was with the owner of a gallery. I'd be chatting people up, but there didn't seem to be that openness to that. People, I don't know, didn't seem to see each other just as they walked down the street. And that was one of the things, and is one of the things I love most about Mexico. It was a beautiful, charming little city, but it felt, to me, it felt a little cold. So the next day, the agent picks me up and takes me to the house that found me on Facebook. The house was perfect, beautiful. Walnut travertine, countertops in the kitchen, long galley kitchen with new appliances, massive windows in every room. The rooms were massive, with massive views of the mountains from every room. What the ad didn't show was the massive vacant lot in front of this house, with the massive house that was going to be built on that lot and massively block every view of the mountains. The agent was on her game, though. She knew she was wrong. She knew she was wrong. She knew. She had lined up 5 other places to show me. 4 of them couldn't even be considered. But that 5th one, though. It was in a little coto development of traditional Mexican homes, which was unusual. It was about 15 minutes from central San Miguel. The owner's name was Christina. The previous tenant had trashed the house, and she was having everything redone. We clicked instantly, and the house was enormous. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and one of the bedrooms and full baths was actually on the rooftop, which had distant but sweeping views of the mountains. The next day, Thursday the 16th of November, when I woke up, I got dressed and I walked around San Miguel some more to see if I felt differently about it than I had on Tuesday. I didn't. I called the agent and told her to pass my regrets on to Christina. It was lovely meeting them both, but I wasn't sold on San Miguel. Luckily, I had heard back from two of the agents in Leon and had some appointments scheduled for viewings on Friday. As I rode the bus back to Leon, I was like, okay, I'm in motion again. Leaving what? Going to what? I was leaving something that was certain and now it was uncertain. I was approaching something that was uncertain. Was I going to find certainty? And I'm still listening and still not hearing. Just motion. Just motion. Lomas de Gran Jardín is literally a mountain that's been developed. The first structures were apartment buildings on the peak of the mountain, 2003, 2004. And then model homes were built, and then people bought lots and started building their own homes. What struck me right away was the security. Residents and visitors needed permission to enter and permission to leave. Residents had facial scans that they used to enter or personalized QR codes to use. Visitors had their pictures taken of their cars, their license plate, and their driver's license. And you had to do all of that to leave as well. Everyone was accounted for, everyone was accountable. The first apartment I saw was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 16,000 pesos, terribly outdated and no view. The second apartment had been terribly updated. You guessed it, black, gray, taupe, stone, square edges, 25,000 pesos. And that's a lot to pay for a view, but no vibe. So, back to my hotel. I had just arrived and was just starting to pack actually for my flight when the last agent got back in touch with me, and sure enough, it was about that weird picture view apartment thing. I told her, I said, well, I'm packing to leave. My flight leaves in a few hours. In 30 minutes, I was in her car. Karima, very nice, very sweet, but she didn't strike me as a bona fide, rental agent. She was too uncomfortable. She couldn't even make the smallest small talk. We spent much of the short ride in silence. The security guard at the building didn't recognize her, and access is an agent's bedrock. The building was clean and there was assigned covered parking. Falcon would like that. It was the quietest elevator I'd ever been in, and pretty soon we arrived at the front door of the apartment. If a Rocca Rolderondu was a design mode, an architectural design mode, she would be mid-century modern. All my life before moving to Mexico, wherever I lived, my decor, my furnishings, my style was mid-century modern. There were only 2 apartments on each floor, so each apartment is half the size of the building, and authentic mid-century modern. Floor-to-ceiling doors, textured walls, room layouts that optimize wall space for hanging art. That photo of the view was a lie. The truth was spectacular. Sky, water, mountains, 180 degrees of mountains. Yes, the bathrooms hadn't been updated since the middle of the century. And yes, the kitchen was the size of one of my handbags. But none of that, nothing explained to me why that rent was so low for this incredible space. Certain uncertainty. I asked a number of basic questions about utilities, etc., none of which Karima could answer, not one. I was like, okay, this isn't real. I had her drive me back to my hotel room, and by 9 o'clock that night, I was back in PV in Primero de Mayo. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next morning when I woke up, that apartment was the first thing on my mind, and that kept happening for several days. My intuition was telling me, let it go, but I couldn't. I was listening, but not hearing anything. The first principle of personal empowerment, power is the ability to engineer and execute your own life. Engineering has to begin with the accumulation and analysis of facts. I had been telling myself stories about this apartment. It was time to get some of the facts. I emailed Karima that I wanted to speak directly to the owner. Mr. Chavez and I had a Zoom call a few days later. He spoke very little English, so his daughter, who was fluent, moderated the call. I told him, I'm a senior citizen. I am not trying to move in a few years. I'm looking for a place to spend the rest of my life. I even asked his daughter, who was a teenager, you trying to move into that apartment when, you come of age? And she laughed, no. Mm-hmm. I told him that the apartment needed a lot of updating, and I needed a lot of latitude when updating it. I told him 19,000 pesos was too much for an apartment that needed that much work, and I was only willing to pay 17,000 pesos. I told him we would have a 1-year trial lease, and at the end of that lease, I would have the first right of refusal to sign what needed to be a multi-year lease. To everything I said, he said, sí, claro, sí, claro. No questions, no back and forth, no discussion. Sí, claro, yes, of course. That's when the alarms went off. Power is the ability to engineer and execute your own life. When I first moved to Mexico, I was really uncomfortable with the whole leasing situation, everything in Spanish and all of these citations, so typical Araca move. I actually got 3 basic Mexican leases, had them translated, and created my own lease. It contained all of the protections for the landlords that the Mexican leases had, but it had some protections in there for the tenants, like US leases had, and Mexican leases didn't. I formatted this document like a split screen, with Spanish on the left and English on the right. Now, I was well aware that only the Spanish language text of a contract is legally binding in Mexico. But at minimum, having the 2 parallels would show intent in case there was any confusion if the fit hit the shan. After I left PTL, this was the only lease I ever signed for any apartment I ever rented in Puerto Vallarta. I sent this document to Mr. Chavez, and what was his response? Sí, claro. Like alarms were going off, but somehow it still felt certain. On December 1st of 2023, I flew to Lyon with the money to pay my security deposit. I met Mr. Chavez in person, and I was right. Karima was his niece or something. I took a picture of her ID. A few days later, I got an email in Spanish from an attorney I'd never heard of. And that email introduced me to the Polícia Jurídica, or legal policy, a document that governs the rental process in much, if not most, of Mexico. Everything shifted. I had completely misunderstood the process. I had the document translated, and tenants had virtually no rights. I could be evicted almost immediately for even the slightest violation. In fact, the Polícia Jurídica was designed for a landlord to be able to evict a tenant without bothering with small things like formal charges or court involvement. It gets better. I would be required to sign individual promissory notes for each month of the lease, called pagares. If something popped off and I couldn't present a pagare showing that I was timely and current in my rent, I could be evicted almost on the spot. Then the pièce de résistance. Even though the attorney solely represented the interests of the owner, even though the Polícia Jurídica solely represented the interests of the landlord, the tenant had to pay the full legal fees to execute the document. I had a choice to make. I was being tested. My alignment with my own empowerment principles was being tested. One of the core principles that I've synthesized from my study of ancient Egyptian science, religion, and philosophy can be summed up in 2 words: no regrets. There's a depiction of the judgment of the human soul at death called the weighing of the heart. And essentially, understanding quantum physics, that matter and energy cannot be destroyed, they can only be transformed. The concept is that at the transition of your soul, known as death, the energy should be as light as a feather, as light as an ostrich feather, the feather of Ma'at. And a big part of that lightness, I understand, is no regrets. No regrets. And that's what was being tested. I had seen myself growing old in that apartment. What would I regret most? Moving forward and risking losing my money? Or releasing that vision and walking away? Life is about risks. You can't grow if you're not willing to take risks. Anything worth pursuing is going to involve risks. In a universe ruled by divine and natural law and order, had I been led to this place only to walk away? So I went into empowerment mode. I engaged a bilingual attorney, and together we revised the Polícia Jurídica. When I flew back to Lyon on December 15th to sign that lease, I had 3 copies showing all of the changes and edits and 3 finalized copies for everybody to sign. And I had my attorney call in and explain in Spanish what my concerns were and what the changes meant. I remember that Mr. Chavez's attorney and her associate went into her office, and I could see them through the glass wall poring over the pages and looking at each other like the pages weren't supposed to exist. After about an hour, they came back into the room and said some things that essentially meant either you sign this document as it is or you don't sign it at all. I said, gracias para tu tiempo. Thank you all for your time. And I stood up and started organizing my things to walk out. Classic negotiation strategy. And then I realized something. I was crying. Tears were streaming down my face. And it wasn't about the apartment. It was something deeper. I was being tested. Did I really believe in my principles? Did I really believe that no matter what choice I made, it was going to somehow be for my highest good? Mr. Chavez had been on the phone for most of this time, in and out of the conference room, doing business. When I stood up and started to gather my things, and he saw my face, he asked his attorney and her associate to leave the room. He walked over from the other side of the table and sat right in front of me. He leaned in and he looked at me and he said, in sweet broken English, I am not trying to hurt you. I am not trying to hurt you. If you pay your rent and take care of my property, we'll be fine. I had been listening and listening and listening and asking. And through him, not from him, through him, the universe answered my question. I signed the Polícia Jurídica. I signed the 12 pagares. We rode up in that quiet elevator, and he handed me the keys to the apartment. And as I opened the door and entered, I knew I had made the right choice. Like and follow me for episode 6 of Journey to the Mountaintop, A Return to Purpose. Walk with me.